Welcome to 78.4, the podcast that helps you leave a godly legacy for future generations by showing you incredible things God has done in the lives of men and women around the world. If He can do those things in these people's lives, imagine what He can do in yours. I'm Bob.
And I'm Matt. All right, so today we will be discussing division. What do we do when we disagree with each other? More than that, are completely divided, choose sides, incompatible. When it goes so far that we disagree with our leaders, feel hurt by them, especially as Christians, sometimes by other Christians. You know the saying, a house divided against itself cannot stand. We usually attribute that quote to good old Abe Lincoln, but who in fact was Lincoln quoting, Bob?
I believe it was Jesus.
Jesus. So how do we as Christians stand in a divided world? What do we do now? So today, we're going to try something really different, kind of going out on a ledge here. In looking at all the division happening now, we thought what better way to dissect and understand our part in this as Christians than if we kind of case studied and revisited the time when some people attempted a coup right here within our ministry, trying to overthrow the founder of Cru, Bill Bright. And perhaps, at least our hope is, by reflecting back and shining a light on that time of division, it'll kind of light the way to give us a path out of this current divided mess that surrounds all of us today.
The value of legacy and the value of 78.4 is that we can learn from the journeys other people have made. And this one is definitely one I think we all can learn from today, even though it happened 50-some years ago.
Right.
I've been with Cru for a long time. In that time, I've been to more than 30 countries and have personally seen God working through this ministry in ways that just blew me away. And if you're a regular listener to this podcast, or if you've watched our legacy videos, you've gotten just a tiny glimpse of the incredible things God has done through Cru over the last 70 years. And He's still doing today.
Right.
But that does not mean everything this ministry has faced has been easy or good.
No, we are human.
Unfortunately.
Humans make mistakes, including humans in ministry.
You know, I hadn't been with Cru all that long when I learned about one of its darkest periods. Now, what draws me to this story isn't knowing the dirt, but seeing God prevail and knowing all the good He brought out of it. I love redemption stories.
Me too. So instead of listening to 3 stories, as we usually do from 3 different people, today we'll hear just the one on the attempted ministry coup back in the 60s, but told through the voices of many of the people involved in that divisive time. And then, in the end, hopefully we'll learn from what happened and be able to apply it to what's going on today.
The people you'll be hearing from today are Bill Bright, the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ, or Cru as we're known in the U.S., Bailey Marks Sr., who at the time was Bill's assistant, Ted Martin, who was involved in Cru's International Bible School, Judy Douglas, who at the time was the editor of Cru's magazine Worldwide Challenge, and Josh McDowell. Now, if you've been with us for a while, then you're familiar with Josh and all of his accomplishments, which are incredible. But when this story started, Josh really was a nobody. They had him overseeing the training of the new staff, but that was it. Here's Josh McDowell.
One of my dreams was to be the speaker for Student Venture, the high school speaker. Come on, what more could a young man in the 20s dream of as a speaker? And I was appointed for that and assigned to it. I was so excited. But at the same time, in the history of Crusade, there was some real turmoil that developed. Crusade was quite large, quite effective, very influential. But some of the leadership, no, the majority of the leadership wanted to turn Crusade at that time into a church. Well, Bill said, no, we are not a church. We are here to serve the church. and they fought it. And at that time that was taking place, these same people, I believe, got into error theologically. And you have to understand, these leaders of Crusade were very charismatic, very sharp, very persuasive. And they got off on an excessive grace kick, as I called it then.
Here's Bill Bright.
Well, in 1967, I began to get rumors from the field that the leadership of the movement, to whom I'd entrusted with great responsibilities, were no longer teaching the basic truths of the movement. They were teaching what many felt was heresy. And I had calls from pastors and friends of the movement saying, "Have you changed your theology? What's wrong with the movement?" And I'd call them in and say, "I'm getting these reports. Tell me what you're doing." "Oh, we're doing what you taught us to do." Well, these men were like sons to me. And I had trusted them to give leadership, and they were very gifted people, like Pied Pipers. The students for the thousands followed them. But I was beginning to realize they had changed the theology. It was more of what is called an Antinomian theological view, where the grace of God is so great, in a sense, it's all right to do anything because God will forgive you. And that led to all kinds of problems on the campus with students who began to have sex and drink and all kinds of things, because the wrong view of God's grace can lead to all kinds of excesses.
In case you're not familiar with the term, antinomianism.
And who is?
What?
who would know that word? That's not a word. I don't say, "Please, honey, pick up the milk," and the antinomianism.
Well, I hope you're not picking up antinomianism.
I don't. Well, I'm about to find out what it is, and I hope not, too. Okay, what is antinomianism?
Antinomianism comes from two Greek words, anti, meaning against, and nomos, meaning law. And so the idea is that when Jesus died on the cross, he fulfilled the Old Testament law. Therefore, God doesn't expect Christians to obey the law.
So in other words, when Paul clearly says in the Bible, "Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound?" By no means. Those guys in the ministry took that to mean, yes, do that.
Exactly. Now, Campus Crusade for Christ, or CRU, is a global ministry made up of men and women that God has called out from all kinds of denominations. So there is unity in the essentials of the faith, and a great deal of liberty regarding the non-essential parts of the faith, like end times or
Predestination.
end times, predestination, that sort of thing. But there has never been any tolerance at all for heresy.
Right.
Absolutely no place for it at all in the ministry.
So we had a division of belief and ideas here. A big one. One that put the ministry on the brink of breaking if something didn't change.
Yeah, so let's pick it up with Josh McDowell.
Well, here I was in charge of all the summer staff, 100 and some. And with all the staff, everything, they were teaching us out of context grace in a wrong way. Now, I was just a kid, you have to understand. Nobody, hardly anyone knew me in Crusade or anything. But I'd been to seminary and all, and I'm very studious. I study, I research, and I knew what they were teaching was wrong. It would destroy Campus Crusade for Christ. So I remember I went to them. And come on, you have to understand, I was a no one going to the big cheeses. And they wouldn't listen to me. And a couple times I called them down in front of everyone. Well, that didn't go over too well. And so they started teaching the summer staff, the 100 and some, 130, I guess who were total, I was responsible for. So I arranged for 90-some% of all the summer staff to go up to that mountain just outside of San Bernardino, California. I felt responsible, so I took them up there, and I taught them the book of Galatians for 2 full days. Grace in the light of law and God's character and nature in our life. And I taught them grace from what I believe was a biblical perspective. Well, when I got back down, the leadership didn't like it. So they came to me 3 of them. Now these were the big cheeses. I was a nobody. They came to me and he said, "You're not going to be the speaker for Student Venture. We are sending you to Argentina." I said, "Where?" They said, "Argentina. You either go or pack your bags, you're off staff." They gave me the ultimatum. Oh my God. I mean, it was like my life went crumbling before me. I loved Cru. And here my dream of being a speaker, but because I confronted some of them, they said, "Nope, you're going to Argentina." I thought that's where they exiled people. So do I leave staff? No, God has called me to staff. Just because things get rough doesn't mean you leave. I often say, people say to me, "Why are you still on Cru staff?" I said, "Because God has never called me off." I said, the call to leave, I believe, has to be greater than the call to come. Most people, they have a call to come, then a little something happens, they don't get their way, they up and leave. And I said, God has never called me off, and it has to be a greater call to leave than the call to come to Cru. And so I read in Revelation, "Obey those I've placed over you, and I will hold them responsible." So, my whole attitude changed. You know, life is attitude and choices. And my attitude changed, which affected the choices that I made. So I went to him, and with a happy heart, I said, "Okay, I'll go." I had to look in the map, find out exactly where Argentina was. And I went. I went to Argentina.
Meanwhile, back at the headquarters, things were coming to a boiling point, and Ted Martin was there to see everything fry.
My son uses the term the King Saul syndrome, where you kind of become the king and you put down other people and that want to become the king. Now this is a little different than that, because in a sense they were responding to Bill. Bill Bright is over them. And they decided a couple of things. One is they wanted to make Crusade a church. At least some of them did. But they felt that Bill was lacking in his leadership. And of course, everybody lacks some in their leadership, and I'm sure Bill would agree with that. And that's why he had Bailey Marks and others working with him here. But anyway, a group of them got together and decided that it would be better if they ran Crusade than if Bill ran Crusade.
That's when Bailey Marks got wind of what was brewing.
I was Bill Bright's assistant, and we were traveling around and with him, and began to notice that Bill was on the telephone and talking and what have you, and I sort of gathered that he was trying to keep things from me, you know, and here I was, new on staff, and we were out on the road and someplace in the U.S., and he said, "I'd like to talk to so-and-so." And so I called up so-and-so, and he was in Lawrence, Kansas. And I said, "Do you want me to try to reach him in Lawrence?" And I looked on my schedule and wasn't anything going on in Lawrence. He said, "No, let's try get Joe." And so we tried Joe. Well, Joe was in Lawrence. Tried about 2 more. And this was all the leadership of the campus movement. And they were in Lawrence, Kansas, and Dr. Bright didn't know a thing about it. And so then I started asking questions, and he said, "This doesn't look good. And I don't know what they're doing, but, you know, let's just keep trusting the Lord, and we'll find out real soon." And as I said, now, you know, it's one thing to call and confront, but I mean, that was the time, you know, I mean, they hadn't even told Bill they were there. And so we got back to San Bernardino, had been on the road, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from one of the guys who was in Lawrence. And he said, "Bailey, we need to see Dr. Bright right now." And I said, "Right now?" And I looked, you know, my clock, and I ain't gone to bed till late myself. And I said, "It's 3 o'clock in the morning." And he said, we need to see him right now. I said, are y'all in from Lawrence? Well, there was just dead silence on the other end of the line. He said, how did you know we were in Lawrence? I said, oh, Bill's known y'all were in Lawrence for the last 3 or 4 days. And so that sort of got his attention. And I told him, I said, y'all can see Dr. Bright at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I said, we just got in off the road, tired and what have you, and y'all probably need some sleep as well. And we'll see you at 9 in the morning. And no, you can't have his private telephone number. And so I called Bill the next morning about 7 o'clock, and I said, they're here, and told him what had happened. He said, great. And so at 9 o'clock, they came walking in, and I think there were 13 of them.
Ted Martin.
They came and they got together and brought Howard Ball, who was the head of the lay ministry at the time. Then they got several other people. Some people came back from Europe to be here for this particular meeting. And as we got together and began to interact, all of a sudden it became clear to me that these fellows wanted to take over the ministry completely. They wanted Bill to resign, to step down from being the head of the ministry. Either, Bill, you step down, or we leave as a team, all of us together. So anyway, it was a big crisis event.
Just to clarify, there were only 6 men who were plotting together, but they were the top leaders in the ministry. Howard Ball told me years ago that just before the meeting, the 6 men grabbed him and several other men, Ted Martin being one of them, and said to them that they were needed for this big meeting. So these poor guys go into this office not knowing what in the world was going on. Here's Bailey Marks.
In the essence, they read Bill a letter that they had written the night before, or in Lawrence, I don't know where, and dismissing him or asking him to resign or he would be dismissed. And they just said that he ran the movement like a dictator and one thing and another. And they were just vain imaginations. We had run away with them, and one person's problem became somebody else's problem and somebody else. And I mean, it was just an infection. And I'd just come out of the business world and hadn't been a Christian that long. And I was just sitting there thinking, I said, I've been in drunken business meetings and where people didn't behave like this. And I just sat there and kept looking at Bill, and Bill just finally said, he said, gentlemen, he said, you know, I might have blind spots. I'm sure I do. But he said, my prayer would be that if the things that you have said about me are true, and you know, Bill used to love to, he'd slap his hands on his chest as I just hit the microphone. And, but he said, I would pray that if they're true, that God would just strike me dead right now. And he said, I'm not resigning and you can't fire me. And he said, Bonnet and I started this movement together by ourselves, and he said, tonight when we go to bed, if y'all take all the staff with you, we'll still be here doing what God called us to do. And that disarmed him completely.
A couple of years ago, I read the letter these men handed to Bill, and I read Bill's notes from the meetings. These guys were brutal. At one point, Bill wrote, they even hate my mustache.
They dumped on his mustache.
They dumped on his mustache.
That was a classic Clark Gable thin stash. How dare they?
Yes. Well, they didn't like it.
It was beautiful.
And by the way, it wasn't just one meeting. They all had different appointments to go to. So they would meet and then take a break and come back for a while and meet again. And so this
wow,
went
so
on.
they would take a break, you're saying, in between verbal beatings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was like
wow.
It was like multi rounds of a prize fight. You half expect to see the girl walking by the, around the office holding the sign up for which round they were going.
Yeah, and
into.
hearing a bell. Yeah. Jeez.
So the first day of meetings went until 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, and Bill even had to speak at a banquet that night. So, can you imagine what it was like for him having to be up and personable all the while this is going on in the background? So, the meeting went until 3 o'clock in the morning, and then they started back up the next day.
Tension must have been unreal.
No kidding.
And both sides, okay, both sides were sure they were right. Does that sound familiar to anyone about things going on today? And yet, what Bill did next, no one could have been prepared for, even Bill himself. And it was noticed by Judy Douglas, a staff member whose office was right across the hall from Bill's.
I didn't know a lot of what was going on, though I knew all of those people. But my office was right across from Bill's. And so I'm watching these conversations, I'm watching people coming and going. And at first, I'm seeing the tension in Bill as weeks of conversations have been going on. And that was hard. Actually, he wasn't always real nice to us in the office then because he was under a lot of stress.
If you say, was I hurt? Was I emotionally affected? Yes, because I love those men. And they had defected from being faithful to the gospel. Coming to ask for my resignation was the result of their initial disobedience to God. So all I can say is God was so gracious. It was either that night or the next night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, when God woke me up. And I've learned when I wake up in the middle of the night, God usually has something to say to me. So I took my Bible into another room so I wouldn't disturb Bonnet. And for the next couple of hours, he showed me something I'd never understood, how to love by faith. And since God commands us to love Father, Son, Holy Spirit, love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, love our neighbors as ourselves, love our enemies. Since God has commanded us to love, he's also given us a promise. If we ask anything according to his will, he hears and answers. So I knew it was his will that I love those men, that I love everybody. So I wrote out a message which later became one of the transferable concepts, how to love by faith.
And one morning he came into the office and he told us, he says, God showed me something last night about loving by faith. He said, he showed me that even people who are not being loving to me, who are being unkind, that he wants to love them through me. And it was like the most amazing transformation because Bill's whole attitude changed, his attitude toward those people. And he refused to let them pull them into this battle and instead chose to respond in love and to not speak unkindly back, but just be firm that he was doing what God wanted and this is what it was going to be, but he showed them love. And out of that came his concept, his transferable concept on loving by faith. And I can tell you, it was very real. His life was changed by God's teaching him about what it meant to love by faith and not just by feelings. That was very special.
Bailey Marks was my associate traveling with me, and when they left, we got on our knees and asked God to bless them and to solve the problem. He was wondering why I didn't feel like killing them. But all I can say is God was so gracious. He never let me resent those men. He never let me be critical of them.
Can you imagine if we did this in our country today? Not give in to the other side or turn from our beliefs, but while we are in the battle, in spite of our differences, love them. Incredible the difference that would make as Christians in the darkness. Now, the story wasn't quite finished. Poor Josh McDowell, remember him? He was still living in that forced exile in Latin America.
I got to tell you, it was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life to be obedient. And what happened was God removed all those people. They removed them all. I was living in Argentina. And after I got what they asked me to do down there, I got that all taken care of. So I started traveling all over Latin America, debating Marxists. It was right at the time that Maoists were the most violent ones, Maoists and Marxists. So I go into universities, and they would challenge the Marxists to debates, everything. And I get up, I mean, with thousands coming out, Chile, Bolivia, Argentina, Uruguay, everywhere. And that's probably where I cut my teeth on boldness. I saw so many things happen, incredible things that have built my faith up and my trust. So I started developing quite a reputation around Latin America. Bring Josh in, confront the Marxists, and I loved it. And I got a call from Bill Bright. He said, "Where are you?" I think I was in Bolivia. He said, "I want you back here day after tomorrow." It was on a Thursday. He said, "I need you here Friday night." I said, "Why?" He said, "When you get here, I'll tell you." I thought, oh boy, what did I do now? And so I just packed a little bag that I had and got a flight and flew back, which was a long ways in those days. And still is a long ways, but not as fast as transportation. And I got back and I got to Arrowhead Springs, and Bill said, "Come on, ride down to a park with me." They were having a staff Saturday picnic at the park with all the staff. Everybody wanted Bill's attention. He said, "Not now." He took me over to a picnic table away from everyone, sat down, and he said, "I want you to call Argentina, have them pack all your belongings, ship it back, and I want you to travel here in the United States, do free speech, debate the radicals and the whole Vietnam era, everything, and I want you to launch free speech for us." I mean, I was so excited. I thought, oh my gosh, this is like talking to Jesus.
Now, let me step in right there. Really key point I took from all this: in all the division and distrusting leaders. And like Josh, sometimes we have every right to distrust and stand up to them like he did. But amidst that turmoil, what did he do? He trusted God to somehow work out what was meant to hurt him for good. It says in Romans, it's a promise. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And I thought, I just couldn't help when I heard that story to keep thinking, isn't it good to know in your soul that God can work out those things meant for evil, that are evil, that God can make good come out of it. I know it certainly gives me hope, especially in these times. And so how did this whole coup attempt come to a close? What was the aftermath? Back to Bill Bright for that.
As a matter of fact, the coup leader came back a few months later and asked if I'd forgive them. He said, "We were on an ego kick, and please forgive us." Well, in the meantime, there were 6 who left. And instead of taking the whole movement, God pruned the movement and sent us that next summer, I believe it's 750, if I remember correctly, new staff. And that had to be a super, super miracle, because they could have taken over the movement, they thought, but God had other plans. He removed them so he could bless the movement. The people who were involved in this coup continued to serve the Lord. But as one of my associates put it, who was very close to them, 25 years later, he said it's like they pulled over, they were riding a train, the car pulled off into a siding, and they've been sitting there for 25 years. And they've gone through some tremendous testing. You don't play games with God. The reverential fear of God is very, very important in my life. There's no place for pride in serving the Lord. He is Lord. We're not Lord. And if we have the right perspective of who God is and do what he tells us to do, we'll see mighty miracles happen.
There's some big lessons that come out of this story that really hit home with me. The first is the importance of knowing God's word. Because Josh knew the word, he was able to spot the false teaching right away. Unfortunately, people who didn't know the word, at least didn't know it that well, they fell for the deception and were harmed by it.
Right.
Next, I have so much respect for Josh and love for Josh anyway.
He's a wild
But my
character.
he is.
He's
he is-
done a lot of great things.
He's a great guy. I mean, I just on a personal level, I really like him, and am blown away by his ministry anyway. But my respect for him grew when I learned that he had the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter what it cost him.
Yeah.
And then I so admired Josh's obedience and trust in the Lord. There's no doubt he was being unfairly treated. He was even attacked. The world would say, fight back, or, get out of there, or at least look out for yourself. But he didn't. He surrendered it to God and let him fight the battle. Look how it all worked out for Josh. On his own, it could have never worked out that well. But God took that mess and made something great as a result of it. And I've seen the results of what God has done through Josh over the years. Thousands upon thousands of people coming to know Christ. People growing in their knowledge of the Lord and being able to give strong reasons for their faith. Orphans clothed and fed. Sick children getting much needed medicine. Would that have happened if Josh had hightailed it and run?
Right.
Would it have happened if he hadn't given the attacks over to Jesus? I don't know, but I doubt it.
Right. I mean, in reality, it was because he was able to, in Argentina, stand up to all those people that got him the courage and the notice that he was able to speak as well as he is and start his ministry from there.
Absolutely. That was a huge training ground that no one thought about putting in Josh's path, but
Right,
God
and yet,
did.
Yeah, obviously God knew, and he knew what these people were going to do. He knew, and he knew their evil intentions, and he was like, yeah, you might think that, but I got an idea.
And finally, there's Bill Bright. He was betrayed. He was attacked. He was insulted. They attacked his mustache.
All right.
Men he loved and trusted tried to steal the ministry he'd built and sacrificed for. But God taught him how to love by faith. We live in some very angry times.
We do.
People are verbally and physically attacking each other over politics and religion and race and a whole host of other issues. But Jesus commanded us to love each other. If we don't, we're disobeying God. Of all the lessons to come from this story, this one, loving by faith, is the most important.
Right. And so that brings us right back to now. This moment we all find ourselves in, a divided moment. How do we, as Christians, face and stand in this moment of great division? Do we choose to hate and get revenge for the wrongs we think happened to us? Or do we stand in our beliefs but love by faith? Love them and see those who disagree with you as God sees them, as his children, your brothers and sisters, as the Lord's priceless, beloved ones. It's your choice how you react. It's my choice. It's Bob's choice. It's all of our choice who's listening. But above all, don't play games with God. Don't play politics or put your earthly wants over God and what he demands of us. To love our neighbors, to put God first, to trust God can get us out of this current mess and whatever mess comes next, to stand in your beliefs, but to stand in love. So that ends our discussion on division. We hope it gave you some good places to start as we try to navigate these divisive waters ahead.
Our hope with 78.4 is that it'll help you flourish in your relationship with Jesus. Usually we offer at least 3 different articles to help you deepen your relationship with the Lord, but today we're only going to offer one, Loving by Faith. It's the transferable concept Bill Bright wrote as a result of all this. And the Transferable Concepts is a series that he developed to help you grow in your faith. You will gain so much by reading these, so please check out our show notes, and also please email us. We'd love to get to know you and Find out how this is ministering to you.
And the audio you heard today comes from some of the more than 400 and growing videos on our website, legacy.cru.org. That's legacy.cru.org. We also have a YouTube channel, Cru Legacy, and a Facebook page. Please check it out. And if you like today's podcast, we ask that you please subscribe so you can get the next one and the next one and the next. Also, please rate us. It helps others hear about our podcast.
784 is a podcast of Legacy, a project of Cru.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. And while we're away, we want to encourage you to remember that whatever God did in the lives of the people you heard speak today, He can do in yours. So until next week, go out there and live the legacy.